So we live in turbulent times where every movement of nations seems to carry greater meaning. The recent signing of the Pact for the Future by 193 countries brought to light a series of questions that cannot be ignored. So now is this agreement, in fact, the long-awaited peace agreement? Or are we being led to believe a false promise, while signs of something much greater unfold before us? Throughout history, ancient prophecies have warned of a period when a global pact would bring a false sense of security. However, those who are more attentive have already begun to notice that the signs of the end times are more present than ever. What is at stake here is not just an agreement between nations, but something much deeper and more spiritual. If you've ever wondered if there is a connection between global events and biblical prophecy, now is the time to pay attention. The date on which the covenant was signed, so close to the Feast of Trumpets, is not a coincidence. Could this be the beginning of the 7 years of tribulation mentioned in the book of Daniel? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of humanity? It doesn't matter if you are familiar with the scriptures or have never paid much attention to them. What you will discover here could completely change the way you see the world today. Stay tuned, because the signs are everywhere, and the time for ignoring them is over. The signing of the Pact for the Future between 193 UN countries was a historic milestone, promoting a promise of peace and sustainable development. Many people observe with curiosity the movement of such diverse nations uniting around common goals, such as sustainability and equality. However, behind the grandeur of this agreement, deep questions arise. Does a pact of this magnitude really align with the interests of all nations? This global union, however well-intentioned it may seem, stirs memories of ancient warnings about the end times, and many wonder if we are heading toward prophecies older than we can imagine. After all, is it possible that a global plan like this carries traces of the fate of the end times, something already predicted centuries ago? So when we look at the Pact for the Future proposal, the promise of world peace sounds almost utopian. But is the promised peace really achievable? There is a detail that few realize. One of the central pillars of this pact is the creation of a unified system of governance. For many, this is a logical step toward addressing global crises such as hunger and climate change. However, for others, especially those familiar with the prophecies, the idea of single global governance begins to sound all too familiar. A unified government is mentioned in several prophecies, some even associated with the figure of the Antichrist and global control. Could we, without realizing it, be witnessing the realization of these events? Furthermore, it is important to reflect on the scope of this agreement. Countries of different cultures, ideologies, and economic systems agreeing to such a comprehensive pact certainly raises suspicions about how it will be implemented in practice. How can an alliance between nations with such different interests work? For example, will a small country with a weakened economy have the same benefits and influence as a great power? These questions echo among those who see this pact as a harbinger of the signs of the end times. The need for a balance between power and justice is crucial, but history has shown us that centralizing power in a single organism rarely ends well. And once again, we turn to prophecies to find parallels. Finally, this global pact should not only be seen as a magical solution to world problems, but also as a warning. We are living in times when the world is crying out for leadership and quick solutions. However, it is exactly in this moment of urgency that we must remember the biblical warnings, which tell us about leaders who emerge with promises of peace, but who in reality are preparing the way for something greater. Could this pact be leading us into a future where global control is inevitable? Perhaps we are approaching something much greater, as the prophecies suggest. The concept of global governance, proposed in the Pact for the Future, arouses mixed reactions. On the one hand, there is the optimistic view that a unified system could solve complex global problems such as hunger and climate change. However, on the other hand, there is a growing fear that this global governance is a threat to the sovereignty of nations. By placing so much power in the hands of a single body, such as the UN, many people question whether this could eventually lead to excessive control over countries, and consequently, over individuals. And this type of centralization of power could be seen by some as a clear sign that we are approaching a period of global control, something that several prophecies have already warned about. Global governance, in essence, suggests a system where global decisions will no longer be made in a decentralized manner by sovereign nations, but rather by a central entity. For many, this idea may seem like a practical solution to challenges that transcend borders. However, there is a much deeper question involved. To what extent are we willing to give up our autonomy in exchange for promises of peace and stability? This dilemma echoes the prophecies about the Antichrist and the end times, which mention a global leader who will bring a false sense of security. When talking about a world government, it is difficult not to draw parallels with these biblical warnings, which point to a system of control that goes far beyond what we can imagine. Another worrying aspect of this global governance is the concentration of power in the hands of a few. History teaches us that when too much power is given to a single entity, there is a high chance of abuse. In a structure where all global decisions are made by a limited number of leaders, control over the population can be easily manipulated. This generates a series of fears, especially among those who are closely watching the signs of the end times. Could we be seeing the emergence of a system that will limit individual freedoms, all in the name of a promised peace? Does the idea of global security justify the loss of freedom that many countries fought so hard to achieve? Finally, it is important to mention that the proposal for global governance is not something that has emerged recently. For years, theorists and scholars have talked about the creation of a centralized system of power, and many believe that this would be an inevitable step towards the fulfillment of end-time prophecies. If we look at history, we will see that whenever there has been an attempt at unified control, whether political or economic, the results have been catastrophic. Therefore, when we observe the current scenario, with the UN proposing this new governance, we cannot help but ask ourselves, are we heading towards a path of no return? Could this be just the beginning of the events that have been foretold in the scriptures? Throughout history, many global events have been interpreted in light of biblical prophecies, especially when it comes to signs of the end times. It is not surprising, therefore, that the Pact for the Future has generated similar interpretations. According to scriptural scholars, both in the book of Daniel and in Revelation, there are clear predictions about the rise of a global power that will bring an era of false peace before the arrival of chaos. These prophecies mention the figure of the Antichrist, someone who will emerge as a charismatic leader and bring solutions to seemingly insoluble problems, exactly as the UN Pact promises. Are we seeing the first steps of this scenario described in the scriptures? The references to the book of Daniel are especially powerful. Daniel talks about a ruler who will make a pact with many nations for a period of 7 years, something that strangely aligns with current global movements. While world leaders promote the pact as a response to global crises, many believe it could be a cover for the emergence of a system that will ultimately bring more chaos than order. So this connection to the prophecies leads many to believe that the covenant could be the precursor to events that will culminate in the end times. And when looking at the signs we are seeing, it is difficult not to make this association. So the apocalypse, in turn, describes in detail a global government that will be led by a figure of absolute power, the Antichrist. This ruler promises peace, but the end result is devastating for those who blindly believe in his promises. For many scholars see clear parallels between what is described in Revelation and the UN Pact, suggesting that this agreement could be the seed for something much bigger and more sinister. This raises great concern, especially among those who closely follow the signs of the times and believe that we are seeing the beginning of an ongoing prophecy. The scriptures also mention that this global ruler will have control over all aspects of human life, from economics to religion. The idea of a global government controlling every aspect of modern life sounds alarming to many, especially in an era where technology allows for mass surveillance. Could the Pact for the Future be preparing the ground for this type of system? These questions resonate strongly in the minds of those who seek answers in the scriptures, and the similarities between what was prophesied and what is happening today are difficult to ignore. Although the Compact for the Future has been widely accepted by 193 nations, not everyone is willing to embark on this journey of global governance. Some countries, such as Argentina, Belarus, and North Korea, have expressed their opposition, raising concerns about the impact of this agreement on national sovereignty. These countries have clear reasons to worry. The centralization of power in the hands of a global body can easily strip nations of control over their own internal policies. It is understandable that, for countries with a history marked by struggles for independence, this idea of ceding power to a larger entity is viewed with trepidation, especially when there are signs of the end times at stake. Argentina, for example, although it has suffered economic crises over the years, maintains a strong sense of sovereignty. The country sees the Pact for the Future as a threat to its ability to make autonomous decisions about its economy and natural resources. Argentina's resistance also reflects a larger concern. To what extent are nations willing to give up their freedoms in exchange for promises of global peace? So this question resonates strongly with the prophecies about the Antichrist, who will come with seductive promises but hidden intentions. Argentina's refusal to fully adhere to the pact can be seen as an attempt to preserve its independence in the face of an uncertain future. Belarus, in turn, expresses its concerns about the centralization of global power through the UN. Under an authoritarian regime, the country is already known for resisting external influences, and its rejection of the pact reflects a desire to maintain full control over its domestic policies. For Belarus, the idea of a global governance system seems threatening, especially as the country's government fears losing its ability to impose its own rules and maintain order. This resistance can also be seen in the light of biblical prophecies. A nation that refuses to submit to global power may be trying to escape something much greater, such as the rule of the Antichrist. North Korea, known for its isolation and authoritarian rule, also strongly opposes the pact. The country already lives under a system of strict control and sees any attempt at global governance as an invasion of its sovereignty. For North Korea, which prides itself on being self-sufficient, the idea of following the guidelines of an international body goes against everything the regime represents. This opposition reflects not only a concern about loss of control, but also a perception that such global governance may be in line with what has been predicted in end-times prophecies. After all, the centralization of power is one of the clearest signs of the imminent end. The proximity between the signing of the covenant for the future and the Feast of Trumpets has raised many speculations among those who follow biblical prophecies. According to tradition, the Feast of Trumpets marks a significant moment in the prophetic calendar, being seen as the beginning of apocalyptic events. The fact that the covenant was signed close to this date leads many to believe that we are about to enter the 7-year tribulation period mentioned in the book of Daniel. For scriptural scholars, this detail is more than a coincidence. It is a possible indicator that the time of prophecies is being fulfilled before our eyes. The book of Daniel is clear in mentioning a 7-year pact that will be made with many nations, and which will mark the beginning of a period of great tribulations. The similarity between this pact described in the scriptures and the UN agreement is undeniable for many prophecy scholars. The Feast of Trumpets, traditionally associated with judgment and repentance, further intensifies the connection between these events. For those who believe in the literal fulfillment of prophecies, this is a sign that we are entering a decisive time where global actions have profound spiritual implications. Does this pact mark the beginning of the countdown to the final events described in Scripture? Furthermore, the Feast of Trumpets has always been a time of warning for believers, a call to prepare for what is to come. The fact that a global pact is signed so close to this date makes many believe that this is a preparation not only for political and economic changes, but also spiritual ones. When we are, perhaps, approaching a point of no return, where global decisions will have a direct impact on everyone's lives. The trumpets, described in Revelation, are not only symbols of warning, but also of events that will bring great changes to the world. And with the Pact for the Future in force, it is difficult not to see these signs as a fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Ultimately, prophetic theories surrounding this date suggest that we are entering a period of tribulation where nations will be tested and where apocalyptic events will begin to unfold. The convergence of global events, aligned with prophetic times, has many asking, are we living in the early days of a period that was predicted thousands of years ago? The signing of the covenant near the Feast of Trumpets could be the beginning of a series of events that will bring to light everything mentioned in the scriptures. The prophecies are being fulfilled, and the signs of the end times are more visible than ever. Throughout this text, you could see that the signs around us are increasingly evident. Ignoring what is happening can be very costly, especially in times where ancient prophecies seem to be so clearly being fulfilled. The question remains, are you prepared for what comes next? Do you really understand what this pact represents and how it can directly impact your life? This is not the time to sit on the fence. What will you do with this knowledge now that you are more aware of the signs of the end times? This is the time to reflect deeply on the future and the decisions we need to make. Don't wait for future events to unfold without first taking action. Life as we know it can change drastically, and it is up to you to decide how you will position yourself in this changing global scenario. It's time to prepare yourself spiritually and pay attention to the prophecies, because time may be running out. What do you think you should do to be ready? Reflect on this and, of course, continue following us to learn more about these crucial subjects. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. Here, you will continue to receive important and in-depth information about the prophecies, the signs of the end times, and what is to come. Always be prepared.